Welcome. I'm Ron Litchman for Hardfire. I'm joined today for a conversation about liberty and libertarianism with John Clifton, who among his various and varied credentials is a long-term observer of libertarian politics and also a participant. He's posted, not long ago, a blog piece titled Growth Hacking Liberty, which you'll find among other John's other pronouncements at electclifton.wordpress.com. Hacking, for the uninitiated, including myself until I read John's piece, is a trial and error method of finding what works, learning from one's mistakes, and arriving at a solution. And John's solution is to devise methods for growing liberty. We'll turn to that in a moment. But first, John Clifton, welcome to Hardfire.
Peace and freedom, and grace be with you.
Good to have you here. First, I'd ask you for an overview. As a long-term observer and maybe frequently sometime participant in libertarian politics, what's your assessment of libertarian politics in the United States today?
Well, there's been 10 years of, I think, interesting progress and some misfires with the party and with the movement. And I think the two need to be distinguished because there are, as we know, various iterations of libertarian thought or pro-liberty thought, as the term has become more popular to express, in order to incorporate the viewpoints of the Libertarian Party and the libertarian philosophy, which is a more rigorous, intellectual, rationally driven presentation of it, versus I would say, libertarianism of the heart expressed by other factions, whether it's the constitutionalist conservatives, such as Rand Paul, the various populists that are out there, various flavors of populism that talk about trying to get away from the elite domination of American politics and American society, and certain candidates who became very popular individuals, such as the Pauls, who have tried in one way or another to beat the system of those elites that inhibit the progress of liberty. I think there's been progress we saw in various forms. We couldn't complete the kind of progress needed because of the institutional barriers, which I'll get more into as we go on, in American society. It's not so much our ideology, it's so much as that we haven't embraced trying to engage defeating the establishment, just to put it in plain terms, and also putting together the kind of coalition that would be, which our philosophy would be the center core of the political movement.
Let me ask you to draw a distinction or present you a distinction. Do you think that the libertarian movement or the Libertarian Party has a principal problem in its message or its medium?
In some ways, with both. The message
and how the other.
The message is presented in a way that is intellectually coherent. That's the normal way we present our viewpoint, and it satisfies us, but it often does not resonate, which is different than penetrate or communicate to people who want to understand certain viewpoints in terms of how it affects them personally, in terms of the selfish factor, and also the emotional factor. Why should I feel like embracing these ideas and not just agree with the ideas? The medium has to do with getting the viewpoints on the air, getting people to talk about it more frequently in terms of being part of mainstream discussion. And that has a lot to do with which media our party and our movement is concentrating on to get the message out and to get our concepts out to the mass public at large.
It seems to me that we have less difficulty stating principles, as you put it, intellectual coherence, than we do expressing solutions emanating from those principles. So here we are in late July of 2018, in the midst of the 2018 midterm elections and New York State gubernatorial and legislative elections, and looking ahead to 2020. So What would what would you advise libertarians and libertarian candidates to say to the electorate to get their votes?
Well, first of all, we need to understand, and sometimes that's in a general presentation when we're presenting our views in general to people, or when we're engaging specific groups or specific issues. Start from the issue and tell them our position about it. Because that way, structurally, you actually are talking to a person at the point of their concern. Like if you go to a jobs, an employment seminar, you talk to them about the libertarian approach to jobs and the liberty view regarding business and encouraging an environment that leads to more employment. That way, you're not sacrificing your principles, and they're not being bored because you're talking to them about something that they don't want to hear about.
Such as perchance abolishing the Fed and going on the gold standard, or some other intellectually pure, perhaps, libertarian ideas that are not likely to resonate with the
When
electorate.
the subject is not necessarily about the Fed or the banksters or those kind of people, you don't necessarily jump right into it. You present, perhaps when you have time, the means by which that issue comes into play in affecting jobs in this country and other countries. That's where you do get other issues in there. But your first presentation to the public would be one of talking to them at that point of concern. One other way to look at this is the 80% position. That is what you see what regular politicians do is usually start their presentation making a statement that they think about 80% of the public should be in agreement about. And then they push back, pivot from that to talking about whatever particular take they have that in the way they want to present it. So that way they put their first foot forward as a consensus, mass, mainstream person before they go into a particular ideological direction. And we maybe need to learn that basic technique of presenting our ideas to the public, whether it's general forums or specific topics.
You are not opposed, it seems, if I read correctly your blog, in libertarian-minded candidates seeking nomination on major party lines.
No,
Am I correct about that?
I'm talking. I'm from the Ron Paul school that liberty is where I want to go. My home is not a particular party. The home is a free country. The home is where we use a particular party as a bus or as a vehicle to get our positions and personnel in place, in places in the political order where we can change policy. That's how the other guys do it. Actually, this whole we say this all the time. That the old Huey Long statement. There's not a dime's worth of difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, and we usually say that in terms of saying we agree with that at the leadership levels. But what does that mean? That means they know that there's not a dime's worth of difference between them either. They use those party apparatuses and the infrastructure that goes with them in terms of money, organization, personnel, to get people in office who then will 90% of the time vote the same way on the stuff that continues to grow government, that continues to induce more authoritarian tyranny across the land in so many different ways and walks of human life. We should also be able to just use those vehicles when we can or when it's convenient to, in order to get our people elected so that we can be the voters who in Congress and elsewhere who voting changes in state and federal policy.
But you're not opposed to getting us or our people elected as Republicans or Democrats, if that were conceivable.
Like in that Ron Paul sense of if you've got a libertarian voting record, interview record, discussion, publication, and legislative record in terms of the bills you introduce and support, you can be a Democrat or a Republican or whatever it took to get you into office. The other reason I cut a break on the matter of that major party divide is because the way American politics is built. It's built to elect Democrats and Republicans based on the gerrymandering situation in every state, based on how districts are distributed, and they're developed to encompass voting in a Democrat in this district and a Republican in that district. And only like 10% of the districts are really competitive or in any way or shape subject to doubt election to election as to which person is going to be elected. And that only changes when demographic changes happen, when people in a certain district pass away or move away and another group takes over. You then have to figure out, in terms of winning office, how to get those seats in spite of the presence of that system that's rigged to take you down a Democratic path or a Republican path in terms of which infrastructure you're supposed to choose.
And another permutation on that sort of approach is to look out on the landscape and find some established party candidates who might be subject to some influence and cross-endorse them. Now that may be anathema to some in the Libertarian
I have a problem
Party.
with that particular variation too, because
Tell me about that.
leads to too much acrimony over this person isn't pure, this person isn't serious, this person isn't a libertarian. At some point you got to say, look, this is not the way we want to select candidates for office. However, I'm not saying we drop having a Libertarian Party or nominations of candidates running as libertarians under the Libertarian Party banner. I'm saying you can add on this secondary function, especially in the wake of, again, what's happened in the last 10 years, where you can vet candidates who can be run in these other elections where there's a strong possibility they can win, because you've already ran them as libertarians, and you already did vet them and field them, and you know these guys are good. So when the situation opens up, like a open seat, and you have other things in place that will make that person a likely victor in an open seat election, or particularly a primary, whatever that party district roles, Democrat or Republican. If it's a Democratic district, run a Ron Paul Democrat. If it's a Republican district, run a Ron Paul Republican.
But those occasions arise seldom. Incumbents pass away from time to time or move away from time to time, but not too often. I think you mentioned maybe 10% of the time. What do we do in the meantime?
In the meantime, we do this because I'll say this: there's a lot of distribution of what limited funds we have, limited ability to get organization out there, so that we can focus on those 5 to 10% of seats that are feasibly winnable, and not just theoretically winnable, feasibly winnable by us when we have the right candidate who has serious funding available and so forth.
Now let me ask you. I'm going to, and with apologies, I'm going to kind of right from left field. I didn't.
Okay.
I'm going to pose to you a semantic hair split. Is it important that candidates we support be libertarians or be libertarian? If you get my nuance.
Okay, it's important to, first of all, embrace being libertarian and supporting a liberty people who are intellectually rigorous in that regard, and or libertarian friendly, liberty friendly. That would mean people who don't wince when we say a certain hardcore position about the party and what we believe, and there may be a different permutation as to how they would express it. And we would say decriminalize drugs. They would say let's reform the criminal justice system. And
that's good enough.
Well, in the sense of if they mean get rid of the drug laws that are the reason why 80% of the people in prison are in prison.
Suppose they just mean, to pick up on that example, decriminalize marijuana and leave the rest of the drug law prohibitions alone, which would not be the libertarian pure position, but an incremental move in that direction. Good enough or not good enough? For
election per election, we make a decision about that. We, in this New York State, LPNY did nominate Scott Jeffrey about 13 years ago, whenever he had that exact position, but he was open about it. He campaigned to get the nomination for governor and got it, and we lived with that decision. Although there were, as you say, the hardcore people who said this was wrong, and did not stop saying it was wrong after he was nominated. You would think, okay, we made a decision, we're going to go with it through the election. and and this guy is a good guy in general and very much appealing, but yeah, we have to make that decision from election to election about where we're going to accept a compromise candidate or position. A lot of people were dissatisfied with some aspects of Gary Johnson's presentations. That's just the way it worked, and a lot of people had problems. Some were very ecstatic about William Weld as his running mate. Other people thought like he had time sabotaging the libertarian message, the way he was expressing certain positions, like he was trying to protect one of the two major candidates.
That, if I recall, was Hillary.
Yes. But that's all over and done. We accepted our nominee and worked with the campaign to get them the best possible outcome, because there are so many things we want to get out of these elections. We want to get Gary Johnson, or somebody like that, enough votes that they can appear in the national debates. We want to get them enough vote total state per state that in a lot of states where permanent ballot access is at stake, we can get those states to permanent ballot access just from the results from the presidential election. And those are not metrics that involve him winning the election, but those are metrics involving our presidential candidate being a factor in improving the party in general for the foreseeable medium term or long term.
So leading up from today to November 2018 and November 2020, you've given some thought to some mechanisms for growing liberty. Tell us about hacking growth.
Or growth hacking.
Or growth
hacking is the concept used in business development, and it's a combination of marketing and structuring of one's organization, where you try out a lot of things. I'm trying to simplify this. You do some rapid split tests, as they call it in marketing, and experimental ideas that nobody else has tried to find an avenue to efficiently grow the organization or the business. And because you're trying out a couple of things, you can see if this is working or that's not working, and you can drop off the stuff that's not working. And as a result, you can get a lot of growth on a blitz kind of method on a time frame that you may not have gotten otherwise. The Airbnb is one of the classic examples. They found a way to market through Craigslist that wasn't being done in the way they did it, and it caused massive growth for that organization in a short period of time.
So what's the recipe for libertarians?
Right. The recipe for libertarians, I think, is to take certain methods that we've seen work over the last 10 years that have been tested. We don't have to go through the experiment phase. We can apply the growth hacking concept to just taking ideas that have we can lift off the floor. It's already been, we have at least one example of it working, and then apply it to the party. And two or three of them put together can cause us to win more major elections. Right now, we don't win major elections. It's a matter of just the way things are, because we can't get our candidate in a position that after the primary season they're the number one candidate to win, or the inside track person. That's why I bring back to the issue of what I call the boss concept, the bipartisan open seat strategy, where you but you look for open seats around the country involving candidates who are retiring or who are dropped by scandal. And it seems like sex scandals are the best kind of scandals to look for because they usually can't walk their way away from that. And whether the district is a Democratic district or Republican district, have a candidate ready, like from a farm of Libertarian candidates who've already ran in that area, or people maybe from Campaign for Liberty, old Ron Paul meetups, even some party people, and have them ready to run those.
So you contemplate having a farm club or a bullpen of ready vetted Libertarian candidates in various districts where vacancies occur, and call them to the mound to pitch.
You can get them pretty rapidly, and so long as you got to have the motor running on a campaign that they can jump into that will work.
But that's a low frequency eventuality.
You can argue that. I would say it's a higher frequency, higher probability method than other situations where we've been trying to, from scratch, to find a candidate, run the candidate, get the resources for the candidate, and win with the candidate. And we end up with the 1 or 2% in most cases that we do at the election results. Whereas, for example, I bring this up in my blog, not necessarily in the post that we mentioned. There was a gentleman named Michael Bentivoglio, I believe, in Michigan. He was a Ron Paul activist, libertarian, conservative, whatever. The Republican incumbent suddenly retired just before the primary. And guess what? This guy was the only guy on the ballot on the for the Republican nomination, to win the primary, and he got elected as a result of that. There are situations like that can happen, and because the district is overwhelmingly Republican, as the Republican nominee, he's had the inside track to win.
Okay. Well, he was at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
What else? What else can libertarians do?
Okay, we can follow this concept of leveraging, and let me go to. I brought up the example of Mayor De Blasio. De Blasio started out as just some regular Democratic operative, and I think he was a campaign advisor for Hillary at one point years ago. But he ran for city council in his district in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and he won that office. Then he ran for public advocate around 2009. And a little known fact about the district is that a lot of people in that district are active voters in a city that usually doesn't vote in the primaries, in particular for the public advocate position. Most of his votes to win the primary for public advocate were from Park Slope, not anywhere else in the city. So he was able to leverage his own district or his own base to do that. And if we find the right areas where a libertarian-friendly audience is probably going to be in, like a college campus, whatever, we can do the same. Because
that may not be in New York City.
Right, it may not be, but we can start looking around. Well, one thing that people also ought to do is, if they're running for citywide or statewide office, and you are popular, attractive enough kind of candidate that you got some votes generated, do some research as to where you got the votes. And that would be your primary district that you can concentrate on in future election cycles, maybe run for, state assembly or other kind of position. And from that particular position, if you can ever win one of those seats, you can then run for maybe a borough president, maybe a citywide position, and in the primaries, where fewer people vote, which is a very important concept in finding a weak point in the established order, you can get your energized group or base to come out. That
certainly happened in the Bronx Queens district.
That's what I was about to say. The most
Crowley's
recent spectacular example, Cortez had a double base of progressives who knew her from the Sanders campaign for president 2 years ago, and then Latino. And they started to come up to a mass in terms of population who was able to beat Crowley, the long-term Democratic incumbent, who apparently had lost touch, with his own district, and again, because it was a primary, where the energized vote is the vote that can determine the outcome. She's in the catbird seat to win the election because
so it seems
she's the Democratic candidate in a 90% Democratic district.
Right.
We can find the same thing and call ourselves, depending on a Democrat running on a left libertarian kind of platform or a right libertarian platform if it's a Republican area. But that's the principle. Leveraging resources and finding our bases where we can is one of the main growth hacking ideas that I promote. Oh, wow. It seems like we're getting close to the end here. I thought we were going to get somewhere. There were other ideas, too, like involving triangulation.
In a remaining minute, tell me about triangulation.
Oh, triangulation is where you don't attack a person or a position that you might want to get the votes from. So where you find something good to say about it or positive to say about it, you talk over the topic, and you can you say, that eliminating ICE or abolishing ICE, you're on track, because we're for getting rid of extra bureaucracies where we can. Here's the right way to go about it. So you're not attacking and saying you're foolish to people who are talking about that particular issue, but you're also bringing up, the right way to go about it from a libertarian point of view, and using it as the pivot. And you may attract some of those people who feel that they're not being attacked, but they're being defended by you. That's one way to explain triangulation, and there are too many others for us to get to in half a minute. I think that these ideas need to be embraced so that we can get somewhere farther than we've gotten with current policies and procedures for running as a libertarian. We can keep running our regular candidates in the regular way, but when we try to actually win a seat, we could do better finding a way to incorporate some of these ideas into our political operations.
Okay. Well, thank you, John. John is as you can tell, a font of ideas, more of which you can read at electclifton.wordpress.com. I'm Ron Litchman. You can follow me at politicalstorm.com. Thanks for joining us.